settlement at this time, because the one who really participate in that kind of activities were the free laborers, and there was not, they didn't require a concentration of them in the territory. What else? After 1790s, what happened, it was not only the expansion of sugar, but also transformation in the cattle economy. Because from that period, the cattle economy was very well organized in terms of better, more effective exploitation of land, the concentration of land, defenseless land, also called potreros. So what started to happen in Báez after that period was more people living in that area, more family, because there was an explosion of sugar regions in the surroundings. So they were not only producing to guarantee demands on local populations, but also to sugar regions. What? Cattle and cattle byproducts. What? Ties, salty meat to feed the slave population, and so on. So what we see here is, in the early 19th century, a concentration of families in that territory. Let me see. Okay. So this is Las Villas province, Santa Clara, Cienfuegos, Azagua la Grande, San Juan de los Remedios, and San Espíritus and Trinidad. Báez belongs to the jurisdiction of Santa Clara. An important aspect to consider is the sugar plantation economy of this area. This area, as you see, is located in the center of Cuba, and has been considered, historically has been associated with the sugar production economy, and has been considered also a frontier region. Why a frontier region? Because the sugar economy during colonial period, let's say after 1790s, and until 1898, was concentrated in the eastern part of the island, right? And Las Villas has been considered several times as part of that process. But this is not real, because not all the western part of the island was connected to the sugar economy. Just some regions of Havana and Matanzas, sorry, that is not in the second or third division in the map. Havana and Matanzas, only areas of Havana and Matanzas has been, were part of that explosion. And by response, the western part of Las Villas, Cienfuegos, Azagua la Grande, and later on, the second half of the 19th century, Remedio. Those areas, there were sugar plantation. They developed a sugar plantation economy as a response of the expansion from the west. But those connected to the east and to the interior were associated with what prevailed in the eastern part of the island during the colonial period, which was a more diversified economy. A more diversified economy oriented to the internal market. So that's justifying the difference, right? And Báez is located precisely in the second model, the second economic model. More diversified economy, a concentration of free people in times of slavery, and cheap lands. Cheap lands because they were interior lands. They were not well connected, there was not a good transportation system, they were not connected to the exterior, and they were, yes, producing, but producing for those areas, not necessarily directly connected with what's going on, right? There was no huge transformation in the socioeconomic structure of this town from that period. Those transformations, we'll talk about those transformations in the early 20th century. But before that, let's talk about the impact of independence war in the territory. So, from 1868 to 1879, the first the first 1868, 1879, the first Cuban independence war, the so-called 10 years independence war, exploded in the eastern part of Cuba, right? I was moving to that area to the west. There was a process that was stopped before reaching the western part of the island. But my point here is that those areas, as was the case of Cienfuegos, Azagua la Grande, San Juan de los Remedios, Trinidad at some point, and the western part of the island were the regions that were very well protected, right? And the sugar mills continued producing at the time of the war, because they had a protection not only of the landowners, but also the colonial authorities, the Spanish, pro-Spanish merchants. And what happened to that part of the island where the war started? Those were exposed to the violence, exposed to the combat from both parts, but also the population of those centers when the population really responds to the independence idea, right? Those rural population, some of them, the so-called free people of colors, I don't like that determination, but it was in the colonial document references, non-white, free non-whites. So these people were the ones who really respond to that. So what's happening in Báez in particular, Báez remained completely devastated after. And those surrounding localities as well, the ones who are close to it, they were completely devastated. So this process that started in the beginning of the 19th century, when there were families producing for those sugar towns, and so on, was completely paralyzed. And when it started to recover after 1878, came the Second Independence War from 1892, 1895. What really happened was at the beginning of the Republican period, 1902, Báez was almost depopulated. Most of its production was advantaged, but there were still fertile lands that were the ones who attract immigrants. The transatlantic migration movement that also reached Cuba, that started in the late from 1880s to 1930s. So Cuba, migration, and who were the ones who migrate to that area? Mostly those from the Canary Islands. And that's a very important aspect to consider, because those who came from the Canary Islands didn't come directly to Báez. They came to different areas in the peripheral the zones. Those were the high demand of sugar production, but they abandoned that mostly after a couple of months and moved to the interior to look for cheap fertile lands. So the justification of that was because there was a long history, right, of connection with the Canary Island immigration to Cuba. They were identified as agricultural laborers, and there was the network that they create really attract a lot of people to that area. And Báez has a history also of that, because we don't have enough time to discuss that in detail. I just want to focus on attention that this story shows that those immigrants who came from the Canary Islands to the region of Las Villas, as not mentioned in other part of Cuba, were concentrated, working not necessarily on the sugar plantation economies. They were there producing tobacco, cultivating. They were dedicated to the cultivation of tobacco. And tobacco was the main economic activity of Báez in the Republican period. Also, what is really important to know is that tobacco, but tobacco not for international market, tobacco for domestic market, cigars and tobacco. So then, yes, Báez exports the leaf to American companies, but mostly the growth of that production was from the domestic market. And that's justified the expansion of the time. That justified, I have a couple of I don't know if I can show you the expansion of that. Population growth as well as urbanization and breadth of services. And important, because I would like to almost finish here and reserve some time for debate. What's happening at this time was that the urban layout did not respond to the traditional colonial town where the square, the church, and the administrative and governmental buildings were around, or the traditional layout of the sugar towns, right, the so-called Báez. It was different. The urban development of this town it starts from the manufacture of tobacco, right? The manufacture, the tobacco workshops. So when you will see there different, I will show you different. Let me see the pen. Okay, let me see. This is in the 1930s. It was a rural celebration, and so there's in mixed possession. This is one of the ideas from the veterans of the independence movement. We have here. Show this also. This is another separate. This is the urban layout. So it's very strict in their composition because mostly of the town is spanned from the tobacco workshops. And here we see road constructions and the local newspapers. Mostly you see here is buena perspectiva tabacalera, which means good future for the tobacco industry, manufacture. And we have local bar and bodega. And those are tobacco brands from Báez, several. And what is really important to understand, most of these brands were they were petitioned in the 1930s, and this is an important aspect because the fact that this locality was producing for the domestic market, the fluctuation of the tobacco international market was less. The impact was less in this locality. It doesn't mean that it was not affected. It was affected less than other areas of Cuba where the so-called tobacco of El Trabajo in the western part of the Cuba, Pinar del Rio, where the data show migration for those towns, precisely because the impact of the tobacco industry. So the fact that these people were producing for domestic markets justified the expansion of these brands during in the 1930s, and this is the church. I'll show you. And this picture were taken in 2004. So you see the deterioration, but gave you an idea that those were mansions, right, at the time. So that's gave you an idea how well the tobacco manufacturer, of course, how well it was for the town to get those kind of activity that again were not as they were not as how's good to find an adjective for that, how they were not as revolutionary, to call it some way, as the big one connected to the export economy in terms of the transformation of their social structure, but they provide certain stability, certain well-being to the population of that locality, as well as finally, let me show you this one. This was one of the Canary Island immigrants that they, at my time of doing the oral history, he was showing me several documents that were very, very good to this presentation. In other words, this is the history of a town that was connected to other activities that also are part of the Cuban history. So we don't know enough about the articulation of the early economic activities related to the internal market, and we have an example here. We have people living here, people who join the big events of Cuban history in different ways, right? So they were part of the Cuban liberation movement, but they also justify the impact of migration in the early 20th century, and also explain why there were several Cuban towns in the interior, in the hinterland, that have differences. They are not the same as others, which have a long colonial history, and those who were associated with the sugar production. So I would prefer to stop here. I'm sorry I've been talking too fast, and my English is not the best, but I would like you just to call your attention, because if you are studying Latin American history, it's good for you to look beyond, right? To read between lines what's happening at the official history at the macro level, and look at the differences, right? In any locality, any region of Latin America, they serve and study, right? So I will encourage you to look at those differences to make that history more rich, right? And credible for those who like to know about it. Thank you. Any questions?
It would be a good time to ask more detail.
What brought the industry, the cattle industry, and the tobacco industry to an end so abruptly in those years?
Yes.
What was that?
No, I end so abruptly here, but because I would like to pay attention to other aspects. Tobacco, well, the cattle raising economy continues, right? And the agricultural production continues. But what really happened was there was production oriented to domestic market and so on. But what I would like to do is that those were traditional activities that remained in the town. But what was new in the 20th century was tobacco, right? Tobacco. There is a history of tobacco cultivation in Cuba, but not precisely in this locality. So what is, for me, called the attention is that those traditional economic activities remain because the demands remain. But what's happening here is that tobacco related to an important episode in the history of Cuba, which is immigration, right? The Spanish immigration, especially Canary, for those people from the Canary Islands. So that's why I'm focused on the, yes, to continue with that, but also looking at the other facts, the other factors, right? That was the case of tobacco. But yes, both activities remain very important. Okay? But the difference was that if you look at the numbers of product, in terms of production, those were the ones who represent, right, the most value at then. But with tobacco, that changed. There was a shift of that. They remained, they were important, but tobacco, yes, contributed more money to the development of the town. Yes. Any other question? Yes.
Was tobacco in the investors, were there more like the foreigners, like Spaniards, or you had other, inland investors who decided to invest in tobacco in Báez?
Yes,